I'm just checking that you can hear me because it's really important, because today in our Relational Climate Change series, we're going to look at a key relational skill of listening, which would be a bit of a problem if you couldn't hear me. So we're not going to be talking, though, about listening to God. That's another sermon for another day. But we're going to be talking about listening in relationships. So today, what we're going to focus on is learning to listen and listening to learn. Learning to listen and listening to learn. So I hope it's something you're going to do today well, all right? But before we start, just take a moment and think, how do you rate yourself as a listener? Or more importantly, how would the people around you rate you as a listener? You can think you're the best listener in the world, but how would your spouse, your work colleagues, your kids rate you as a listener? If you're brave enough, you could ask them afterwards. Because the fact is, if we are a better listener, it'll help change the relational climate around us for the better. But I thought, you can all sit there saying, you're really good at listening. And I thought we could start today with a bit of a test. All right, sorry for those students who've been doing exams. All right, you've got to just engage your brain with a bit of brain power. And I want you to listen very carefully. All right, you can take notes if you want, and I'm going to talk you through a story and ask you a question at the end. All right, are your brains switched on? Yeah. Okay, so imagine you're a bus driver. Here is your bus. I'm going to read this. You stop at bus stop number 1. Okay, 3 people get on the bus. One of them is wearing a red hat. Okay, stop number 2. 4 people get on and 1 gets off. Stop number 3, 2 people get on, 1 person carrying a bag, and the person with the red hat gets off. Stop 4, another 2 people get on, and 1 gets off. At stop number 5, 3 people get off. So this is the question. How old is the bus driver? Now, if you're listening carefully, you should be able to answer it. Because I said at the beginning, imagine you are a bus driver. We need to listen carefully. And you may have rated yourself as a really good listener, but that might have just shown, okay, you need to listen up to this message. All right. So why is listening important? Well, we live, if you hadn't noticed, in a really technological age. All right, our world is moving fast, the sirens blaring down the road. And people rarely do one thing at a time. People will be talking, texting, watching TV, trying to have a conversation. All right, and communication in our fast-paced world is becoming more important than ever. All right, but are we really listening to people? Have you ever been in a situation you're trying to share something to people and just like, yep. Or the distraction of a ping goes off to say you've got a text message and you can be in an in-depth conversation with someone and they're like, okay, let's focus on that. All right, this is often what happens to our communication. So we are losing the art of conversation in an overstimulated world, and it's affecting our relationships. It's affecting our connections. And why is it so important? And why are we doing this as part of the relational climate change? It's because one key skill in all relationships is listening. It's a key skill for effective communication, and everybody has the basic need to be heard. We live in an age where people are meeting together less and less face-to-face. We tend to send messages which are 140 characters or less, rather than really hearing what people are saying. And we need to make concerted efforts to make connections when given the opportunity, because genuine listening gives people a gift. It gives people a gift of time, which is often what we don't have at the moment. Genuine listening, and why this is so key, is because it can build relationships. Listening can solve problems. At work, listening means fewer errors, less wasted time. At home, it helps develop a family who can solve problems and can be listened to and loved. It builds friendships and careers. Listening saves money and marriages. Wow. We need to learn to listen. So let's look at the wisdom of the Bible with this. In James 1:19, James says, everybody. Who? Everybody, not just the counselor who's been trained to listen really well. Not just the pastor. Okay, they listen really well, but I'm just not a listener. Everybody should be quick to listen and slow to speak. The Bible instructs us to use our ears to listen and to be quick about it. What should you do first? Be quick to listen. Quick to step in and listen. All right, be speedy. And often, sometimes we can stand back, but the Bible instructs us to lean into relationship, to listen. The Message version puts it like this. It says, lead with your ears in a relationship. In your relationship, are you leading with your ears? All right, and following up with our tongues. We need to lead in our relationships, in our relational climate. But the thing is, I don't know if you've noticed, we often do it the other way around. We lead with our tongues and follow up with our ears. All right, you might have heard this saying, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we can hear twice as much as we say. But often we look, let's just go through this. But often, so God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we can hear twice as much as we say, but we often act like we've got 2 mouths and 1 ear. All right, this is how we should actually look. All right, when you're engaged in conversation with someone, you should look like this cute little mouth. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about these 2 things, learning to listen, how we can listen, and then listening to learn. So learning to listen. I want to start with looking at a very important part of your anatomy called your brain. All right, your brain, all right, is really vital in listening. People speak at about 100 to 175 words per minute. All right, 100 to 175 words per minute. But people can listen effectively to as many as 300 words a minute. What that means is when someone is speaking and you are listening, you are processing at double the speed, so you have extra brain space. That means as I am speaking now, some of you are using that extra brain space to think about what's going to happen at 1 p.m. this afternoon when England play Panama. You're thinking about what you could have for lunch today. You're thinking, oh my goodness, it's hot in here, I just can't wait for a cup of tea. All right? And that is how we've been made. So you don't pay attention. And you may say yes to something without missing what you actually said yes to. And you might experience this. You might have experienced this maybe with a spouse saying yes. And then you'll say, yeah, but you said yes to that date. And they're like, did I? Or you might say to your teenager, please collect something from upstairs. And they say yes, and they go up and say, what am I up here for? Now, those are random examples, just to say, not about my family. All right. So, the great German theologian who was alive during World War II, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, said, a kind of listening with half an ear presumes to know what the other person has to say. He says, impatient, inattentive listening that is only waiting for the chance to speak. And this is the consequence when we don't totally use our brain to totally focus in. All right, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. Because we are using that extra brain space to think, okay, what am I going to say? How am I going to close this conversation? How can I solve this problem? Rather than really listening to understand. And therefore what happens is we misunderstand people. It causes issues in relationship. We don't pay attention and we get the wrong idea. So what I want to do now is just show you an example of someone who didn't listen and who got the wrong idea.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, Mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about
All right, so at least he asked a clarifying question, he got out of that. But that's what can happen in relationships. We can not understand and we can come out with a response that may actually hurt someone and lead someone not to survive. All right, so listening requires being active. It requires concentration. And when we're looking at learning to listen, there are various skills we can employ and learn. We can be present and not let our mind wander. We can maintain eye contact with people, not full-on eye contact, because that would freak them out, but just maintaining eye contact, allowing people to know that they have our full attention. We can ask questions for clarification, such as the German Coast Guard. And we can listen to understand, not to reply. And I want to give you an example of a practical exercise when we're at this part of learning how to listen that Wolfie and Ali gave France and I about 21 years ago, nearly 22 years ago, of how to listen to one another. And I thought I'd invite my husband up just to, you need the microphone, just to explain the exercise and how something practical for you to listen to.
Well, in our early years of marriage, Deb and I had a Mayday, Mayday, we are sinking moment, and a particular relational climate challenge. So we got to a point where we just couldn't talk about finances in our marriage. And so the moment we tried, we would just end up having such a big row about it. We could just spend a couple of days just being irritated and frustrated with each other, to the point where we actually just couldn't talk about money anymore, which becomes a bit of a problem, when you have to pay the bills and you have to set budgets and organize and all of that. So we were in this, not so pleasant relational climate when it came to talking about finances. So Wolfie and Ellie, we went back to the advice they gave us, and they called it the pillow exercise, but you could use anything, for that. And so I'm just going to explain it to you because it may really be helpful for marriages or work colleagues or friends or, whatever the case may be. But the idea is that whoever has the object, it is their chance to share and to speak. And then the other person, it's their responsibility to listen. And so if I'm holding, and this would be the pillow or the bottle, if I'm holding it, then if the other person, and I'm busy sharing, and the other person gets defensive or starts speaking back or in any ways tries to share their point of view, they want to speak, then I can claim my rights as the holder of the object and say, no, it's your turn to listen. Now and then what they need to do is they need to reflect back what they think I'm trying to communicate and what I'm trying to say. And so in that way, they are proving that they have listened by conveying back actually what I believe I'm saying. However, sometimes what happens is that in that process, and what happened with us as we were talking about finances, I realized I was communicating one thing, but actually what Deb was hearing was something completely different, and then vice versa. And then as we talked about our finances particularly, the point of conflict that we discovered was that I had a high value for holidays, and Deb had a high value for savings. So I wanted to just put more budget into the holidays, and Deb would just see the savings going down. And but as we talked, and as I would share, and Deb would listen, and then Deb would get her chance, because what happens is you pass the object over, and then the other person gets their chance to share, and then I have to listen and reflect back. What came to light was something so deeply hidden. We had no idea how a past issue, from me personally, in growing up, when I was growing up, I had an incident just with my dad that he basically took all of my savings away that had been, I'd been building up for years, and he used it for something else. And I never realized that had robbed me and taken away that value for savings, because I'd made sacrifices without experiencing reward. And so years later, in our marriage, this now had a bearing on us being able to talk about finances. But it was only as we listened that we were then able to bring change to our relational climate.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, babes. And we just wanted to share that with you as a really practical tool that you can use. You don't have to be at work and say, can we just get a pillow? because I just need to talk about this. But you can develop the skills of when someone is listening, not jumping in with problem solving, not jumping in, but just listen and using questions to reflect back. And you will see how amazing it is that you come to solutions. And even to instruct someone, say, well, it's now my turn. Can I share? And you listen. And yeah, it's learning. And we're all on a learning journey. No one is listening perfectly. And we're all on a learning journey of how we can listen better. So that's learning to listen. And now what we're going to do is flip it around and say we're listening to learn. Let's go beneath the skill of listening to why we listen. And we've reflected a bit about it. We listen to understand the other person. Now, what I want to do now with you is just use both of your hands. I want you to take the shape of your ears, all right, like this, okay? And then what I want you to do is just put them together like this. And what do you make? A heart. And if you think about the word heart, now some of you might have slightly different shaped hearts depending on your ears. Some have got really big hearts, some have got little hearts, all right? But that makes a heart. And if you think about the word heart is made up of the word hear. And the word hear is made up of the word ear. So we use our ears to hear, to listen to others' hearts. Because when we're listening, we are using our ears to look at the other person's hearts. All right? So even when you're listening, you can do this. I see you. I see your heart. All right? We're looking and hearing what is in somebody else's heart. And this is really important because we can have all the skills of listening in the world. And I could have gone with you today and done lots of practical skills of listening. But if our motive underneath it all is not to really hear what the other person is saying, to really hear what's on the other person's heart, then it's just not going to be successful. And you can have no skills of listening, but if you have the correct motive, if you are really listening to learn what is on someone's heart, you will succeed as a great listener. And the question is, when we listen, are we listening for ourselves or are we listening for the other person? So often when we listen, we're listening for ourselves. We're listening kind of like, okay, let me find out what I need to do here. Does it involve me, any responsibility? How can I help? Rather than actually really listening, focused on the other person. David Augsburger said, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. So when you listen, you need to love by looking at someone's heart. And you may have been in situations where you don't feel listened to and you haven't felt loved by the other person. And unfortunately, we can't control other people's listening, but what we can do is we can take responsibility for our own listening and love others through our listening. Listening is the highest form of affirmation. It invites another person to exist. And when we affirm a person, when we listen and put more emphasis on affirmation than answers, we cause them to exist. We cause them to feel heard and feel loved. Another quote is Douglas Steer, which says, to listen to another's soul may be almost the greatest service that any human being ever performs for another. To listen to someone's soul. That means looking at someone's heart, listening to someone's heart, using our ears to hear what's on someone's heart. And if we think about Jesus, think about his conversations. He was the ultimate listener. He engaged with people. He listened. He asked questions in response. And he was really skilled at drawing out people's hearts and communicating what they needed to hear. And we're going to look in Matthew 8, verse 5, a story of when he met a Roman centurion. And we'll read this out. So when Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion, a Roman centurion, came to him asking for help. "Lord," he said, "my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly." And Jesus said to him, "Shall I come and heal him?" All right. Now, obviously, this guy was identifiable as a Roman centurion. All right. In the Bible, it doesn't say when Jesus entered Capernaum, a bloke appeared just asking for help. All right. So he was obviously wearing something that identified him as a Roman centurion. And the Romans were the invaders. They were the invaders at the time. They'd come into the land. So this wasn't someone who could have been very friendly. And then he asked, "Lord, my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly." Now, in that time, in that context, servants were seen as nothing. They were just seen as property. All right, so when a Roman centurion comes and says, "My servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly," it's not just words. Jesus is able to listen and think, "Oh, wow, this is a Roman, the invader coming in, who's asking for his servant who should just be like property to him, but he's worried about him. He's saying he's suffering terribly." So Jesus asks a clarifying question: "Shall I come and heal him?" And he's asking this not just like, "Oh, do you want me to come and heal him or not?" At that time, Jews were not allowed to enter Gentiles' houses. So he was clarifying, are you asking me as a Jew to come in to a Gentile's house and heal him? Shall I come? Is that what you're actually asking me to do? And the centurion replied, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. You are a Jew, I'm a Gentile. I acknowledge who you are as a teacher, as the Messiah. You do not deserve to come under my roof, but say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one go and he goes, and that one come and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." So what Jesus is seeing here is his faith. He's equating his life to Jesus and saying, you have the lordship over this. And so what did Jesus do? When Jesus heard this, and he just didn't hear words, he heard this. He heard the fact that he had faith. He heard that he had love and compassion and care for his servant. Jesus saw beyond appearances of a Roman centurion. He could have just been like, "You're a Roman centurion. What have you got to do with us?" But he saw beyond appearances. He saw to his heart what was going on in his heart. And it says at the end, and Jesus healed his servant. You see, listening to others draws out what's on their hearts, stepping into another world to understand. And Jesus was the ultimate person who did this because he stepped into our world from heaven to understand what is happening with us. Another quote from a senator in California said, "Listening requires entering actively and imaginatively into another person's situation and trying to understand it." In Proverbs, the purpose of a man's heart is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. See, when we listen, we're being generous. We're offering the person a gift of understanding, a gift of acceptance, maybe not agreement, but acceptance, saying, "I hear you." The gift of taking another person seriously. So where does this leave us? As we look at our relational climate, as we've been looking at the climates we create around us, you may be someone who doesn't listen very well, and you know you don't. You may be someone who thinks you listen well, and you actually don't. You may have in the past not been listened well to, and it may have hurt. But as we've looked at learning to listen, just looking at the skills that we've needed, using all our brain, our thoughts, and acknowledging the other person, understanding what people mean, forcing ourselves away from distractions like our phones, like what's going to happen for lunch or the football, all right? And to actually force ourselves to say, what is this person actually saying to me? What do they mean? And also, if we're listening to learn, focusing on the heart of others, all right, not on ourselves. All right, you cannot change being listened to. You may be in a situation where you just feel you are not being listened to by your spouse. You are not feeling listened to at your work. But what you can change and look after is how you listen. There is a relational climate that is around you, which is affected by your listening. All right, you need to take the initiative to first listen in relationships. And I want to ask as we conclude, and we're going to play some music in a moment, just to pause and take a moment, and just take a moment and ask God, is there a relational climate around you that is being affected by you not listening? Is there a relational climate that has hurt you because you have not been listened to? You see, Jesus is someone who's an amazing listener. And he died so that we could get forgiveness for where we haven't listened. He died so we could take away the shame that we have where we've maybe hurt people by not listening. And he's here today to forgive you. He's also here to heal us. Heal us where we've been hurt by people who have not listened to our hearts. In situations where you've maybe shared your heart with someone, you've been really open and vulnerable, and that person's been more interested in their phone than listening to you. More interested in solving your problems than listening to your heart. So what we're going to do is just spend a few moments and just ask God, is there anywhere that I've been hurting people in my relational climate, around where I am, the climate around me, by not listening? And is there anything where I am holding on to hurts where people haven't listened to me? So we're just going to spend a few minutes just thinking about that, and then we'll pray.